The air in the kitchen was thick with the smell of burnt toast and a silence that felt heavier than lead. Daniel, a man whose life was built on meticulous ledgers and predictable routines, stood gripping a thin slip of paper. It wasn't a bank statement or a tax form. It was a receipt for a bracelet that his wife Clara wore every day, a shimmering circle of white gold and diamonds she dismissed with a casual wave of her hand as a lucky find at a clearance sale. But this receipt, found tucked into the lining of a jacket she hadn't worn in months, screamed a truth that made his blood run cold. The cost wasn't a few $100s, it was 10 times that. And the name scrawled next to purchaser wasn't Daniel's. It belonged to a man he didn't know. He'd first noticed the bracelet about 6 months ago. It was an exquisite piece, far too elegant to be the result of a spontaneous bargain hunt at a jewelry store outlet. Daniel had complimented it, and Clara, usually effusive and descriptive about her purchases, had been strangely terse. "Oh, this old thing? Just a little something I picked up while you were away on the Toronto trip." It was a ridiculous markdown, almost a steal. "You know how I love a good deal," she'd said, already turning to refill her coffee. Daniel, trusting to a fault and preoccupied with an upcoming merger, had let it go. Clara was good with money. She had an eye for quality and the patience to wait for a clearance bin. The explanation fit, or at least, he had convinced himself it did. Their marriage, 10 years strong, was comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. Daniel was a senior accountant, his world governed by logic, transparency, and balance sheets. Clara was an interior designer, her world a vibrant palette of textures, colors, and whispered phone calls about client emergencies. They occupied the same house, but often felt like satellites in different orbits, crossing paths at dinner, sharing a bed, but rarely truly connecting. He loved her, of course. She was his anchor, the beautiful, spirited woman who had softened his rigid edges. He'd never once entertained the possibility of infidelity, not even a fleeting, paranoid thought. Their life was a stable equation, and he was the one who checked the math. The receipt's discovery was purely accidental. Daniel was doing his biannual cleaning ritual, preparing to donate old clothes. He grabbed an old tweed coat of Clara's, a piece she'd bought impulsively for a business trip to Seattle and never liked. As he lifted it, he heard a faint crinkle from the inner breast pocket. It was the sales slip, folded tightly. The logo at the top, Monarch Jewels, was instantly recognizable as one of the most exclusive, high-end jewelers in the city. A place where clearance was an unheard-of concept, where a single polished diamond could cost more than his car. His glasses slipped down his nose as he scanned the details. Item: white gold paved diamond bangle. Price: $18,500. He swallowed hard, the number a physical punch to the gut. Clara had told him it was under $1,000. The lie itself was a seismic shift, but the line beneath the price was the true epicenter of the quake. Purchaser name: Marcus Thorne. The name was unfamiliar. A bold, confident script that looked utterly out of place on a receipt for his wife's jewelry. Daniel walked to the living room, his own controlled world spinning into chaos. He looked at Clara, who was curled up on the sofa, scrolling through her iPad, her attention focused on a digital mood board. The bracelet sparkled subtly on her wrist, catching the afternoon sun. It looked magnificent, expensive, and now, utterly damning. He sat on the opposite armchair, the receipt burning a hole in his hand. He could confront her now, throw the paper down, and watch her carefully constructed facade shatter. But the logic that ruled his professional life asserted itself. He needed more data. He needed to understand who Marcus Thorne was, and why he had paid nearly $20,000 for a lie Clara was wearing. The confrontation would come, but not until he held all the variables. This wasn't just about a bracelet anymore. It was about the fundamental truth of his marriage. He folded the receipt meticulously and slipped it into his wallet. A silent, volatile secret kept close to his heart. The investigation had begun. He pretended to read the newspaper, but his eyes kept drifting back to his wife, seeing a stranger in familiar clothes. Daniel's investigation began where all modern secrets are first unearthed: the digital realm. The name Marcus Thorne was his single fragile thread. He started with the most common platform, LinkedIn. It took him only 15 minutes of cross-referencing the city, the high-end nature of the jeweler, and the general age bracket he guessed Marcus Thorne would belong to find a match. The profile picture showed a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine, a sharp jawline, impeccably tailored suit, and a self-assured, almost arrogant smile. Marcus Thorne, CEO of Thorne Development Group. Real estate development, one of the few industries where a $18,500 bracelet could be considered a casual gift. A quick search of Clara's design firm revealed a small, uncomfortable link. Thorne Development Group had been the client for a massive, multi-million-dollar luxury condominium project 3 years ago, a project Clara had frequently mentioned as a career highlight. The connection was professional, but the gift was devastatingly personal. Daniel didn't panic, not outwardly. Accountants are trained to maintain composure while facing financial ruin. Emotional ruin, he was quickly learning, required the same detached processing. He needed to understand the nature of their relationship. Was Marcus Thorne an old flame she'd reconnected with? A grateful client who overstepped the boundaries of professional gratitude? Or the truth that his gut was already screaming? He needed hard evidence, not circumstantial links between a receipt and a client list. His next step was a subtle form of surveillance within his own home. He started paying close attention to Clara's schedule, something he'd previously ignored, trusting her simple declarations, meeting with a client, checking samples, site visit. Now, he noticed the slight deviations, the days she left the house a little too early, applying perfume she never usually wore. The evenings she claimed to be working late at the office, but his call to her cell phone went straight to voicemail, only for her to call him back an hour later with a flawless explanation about a poor reception area in a basement showroom. The most telling sign, ironically, was the meticulousness of her lying. A liar, Daniel knew, is only as good as their memory. Clara's stories were too smooth, too rehearsed. The clearance sale story had been delivered with the precise details of a true story. The overly enthusiastic sales associate, the slight scuff mark on the presentation box, the rush hour traffic she'd braved to get the deal. It was a narrative crafted to be impenetrable. He made a copy of the receipt, keeping the original securely in a safe deposit box, an accountant's instinct to preserve the primary evidence. He then decided to risk a direct but subtle probe. One evening, as they were winding down, watching a documentary, he casually brought up a piece of local news about a new, controversial development. "That's a Thorne development project, isn't it? Marcus Thorne. Isn't he the one you worked with on the Azure Tower?" Clara stiffened almost imperceptibly, but recovered with astonishing speed. "Oh, Marcus? Yes, that's him. Very sharp, but a terrible micromanager. Thankfully, we wrapped up that project ages ago. I haven't spoken to him in months." "Why?" she asked, turning her head to meet his gaze with an innocent, slightly bored expression. Her hand rested on the sofa cushion, the bracelet gleaming under the lamplight. "No reason," Daniel said, forcing a benign smile. "Just saw his name in the news. He seemed like a big shot." "He is," Clara confirmed, leaning back, the tension apparently gone. "A very rich big shot. Now pass me the remote, will you? This documentary is getting a bit dry." The lie, the statement that she hadn't spoken to him in months, was his confirmation. The Azure Tower project had concluded nearly 2 years ago, but the bracelet had been purchased 6 months ago. The timelines didn't align. Marcus Thorne was not an old, grateful client. He was a contemporary source of gifts and lies. The investigation was moving into the realm of action. Daniel realized he needed to understand the logistics of their meetings. The next step would require more than digital searching. It would require a physical confirmation of the infidelity, a necessary evil before he could face the woman he loved and the reality that was tearing his life apart. He watched her until she fell asleep, the silent, glittering symbol of her betrayal mocking him in the dim light of the bedroom. The next day, he called in sick to work. The fabricated illness gave Daniel the temporal freedom he needed. He started following Clara. The act felt cheap, a betrayal of their decade-long trust. But he reminded himself that the foundation of that trust had already been shattered by a $18,500 lie. On the second day of his silent surveillance, he got his confirmation. Clara had announced a full day of sourcing materials for the new Henderson project, a project Daniel knew nothing about, which was unusual given her tendency to discuss her work passionately. She left the house at 9 o'clock, impeccably dressed in a chic, black business suit, carrying her oversized designer tote. Daniel, driving his unassuming sedan, kept a discreet distance. He followed her through the city's busy streets, past the design district, and surprisingly, past her own office building. She drove for another 20 minutes, heading toward a more secluded, affluent neighborhood of high-rise, exclusive residential buildings, the kind of area that catered to the Marcus Thornes of the world. She pulled into the underground parking garage of a building called The Pinnacle, a sleek structure known for its anonymous luxury. Daniel found a spot across the street, near a cafe, and waited. He had to assume she was meeting him inside. The waiting was the hardest part. It was an excruciating blend of boredom and pure corrosive dread. Every minute that ticked by was a minute she was closer to the man whose name was on the receipt. After an hour, Daniel walked into the lobby of the Pinnacle, using the pretext of needing directions to a nearby fictional office to gauge the security measures. The concierge was helpful but strictly controlled access. He couldn't just walk up. He returned to his car, his mind working in overdrive, trying to find an angle, a logical loophole. It was then he saw the delivery van. A local high-end grocery store's vehicle pulled up to the service entrance. An idea, illogical and desperate, formed in his mind. He waited for the driver to return to the van after the delivery. "Hey, friend," Daniel called out, approaching the driver with a convincing, stressed expression. "I was supposed to meet my wife, Clara, here for a quick lunch, but my phone battery just died. I think she might be in the penthouse apartment. Do you know which one she was ordering for?" The driver, tired and eager to move on, squinted. "Clara, let me check the manifest." "Ah, yes, Clara T. That's apartment 42A, paid for by a Mr. Thorne. Always a big order. She said she's expecting a delivery of fresh flowers later, too. 42A, Clara T, paid for by Mr. Thorne." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. He thanked the driver and walked back to his car, the adrenaline draining away, replaced by a cold, heavy ache. He didn't need to see them together. The confirmation was complete. The luxury apartment, the false work narrative, the financial dependency for a casual lunch order, it was all confirmation that their relationship was ongoing and entrenched. Daniel drove home, not wanting to wait for her to emerge. He couldn't trust himself to maintain his composure if he saw them leave together, or worse, if he saw Marcus Thorne drop her off. He needed to be alone to process this new, brutal reality. He walked into their empty house, the silence amplifying the weight of his discovery. The meticulously decorated home, Clara's creative masterpiece, now felt like an elaborate stage set for a lie. He sat at the kitchen table, the very table where she had casually lied about the clearance bracelet, and pulled out the receipt again. Marcus Thorne. He was the benefactor, the buyer, the reason for the deception. Daniel realized he was no longer an investigator. He was a victim preparing for a confrontation. But the confrontation had to be tactical. He had spent his life dealing with complex financial problems. This was not just a personal crisis. It was a negotiation for his future, and he needed leverage. He looked at the receipt, and a cold determination set in. He needed to find out why Marcus Thorne was buying his wife expensive jewelry and funding her secret lunches. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about the motive. Affairs are emotional. This felt orchestrated, almost transactional. The next step required Daniel to temporarily set aside his deep-seated feelings of betrayal and hurt, and to once again view the situation through the clear, unblinking lens of a forensic accountant. The expensive bracelet, the luxury apartment, the carefully constructed lies, these were not just the trappings of a torrid affair. They were financial transactions. And financial transactions, especially in the world of a high-rolling CEO like Marcus Thorne, often left a paper trail that went deeper than a jewelry store receipt. Daniel focused his investigation back on the professional link, Thorne Development Group. He used his professional network, calling in a few favors from former colleagues in regulatory compliance and internal auditing. He phrased his requests vaguely, asking for background checks on a competitor who might be involved in dubious practices, a common enough request in his field. He was looking for anomalies, for red flags that might connect Marcus Thorne's corporate finances to Clara's design firm. The initial findings were innocuous. Thorne Development was a legitimate, massively successful enterprise. But Daniel pushed further, requesting a deeper dive into their subcontractors and vendor payments, specifically surrounding the multi-million-dollar Azure Tower project, the last major job Clara had done for Thorne. The breakthrough came a week later, not from an official report, but from a discreet, anonymous email from a source Daniel had cultivated years ago during a corporate fraud case. The email contained a cryptic attachment, a spreadsheet detailing a series of large, unexplained consulting fees paid out by Thorn Development Group during the finalization of the Azure Tower project. Most of these payments went to shell corporations that were hard to trace. However, one sequence of payments, totaling over $500,000, had a very specific recurring description: design advisory, procurement oversight, CRA, designs. Clara's firm was called Clara R. Ashton Designs, the initials matched. Daniel's hands trembled as he cross-referenced the dates of the payments with the dates of the bracelet purchase. The pattern was undeniable. The first large payment was dated 2 weeks before the bracelet purchase. The bracelet was not a spontaneous gift of affection. It was a down payment. The affair was a quid pro quo, a dangerous exchange that implicated Clara in something far more serious than marital infidelity. He confronted the spreadsheet, realizing the terrifying implication. Clara wasn't just having an affair for luxury. She was accepting significant, likely illicit, payments from Marcus Thorn, potentially compromising her professional ethics or, worse, aiding in financial malfeasance within Thorn Development Group. The $500,000 was likely a bribe or a payoff for some service related to the Azure Tower project, possibly inflating costs or overlooking material defects, a common tactic for developers to siphon funds. The expensive jewelry was merely a psychological mechanism, a shiny distraction to make the transaction feel less criminal, more like a romantic windfall. Daniel had his full leverage now. He had the receipt, the proof of the affair's location and duration, and now the spreadsheet detailing the financial corruption. He had moved from confronting a betrayed husband to confronting a financial conspiracy. He knew he couldn't simply divorce her. The implications of this discovery could ruin both of them professionally, financially, and legally. He had to handle this meticulously. He waited until Clara was preparing for another one of her client meetings. She was in the bedroom, meticulously applying her makeup. Daniel walked in, his expression calm, his voice steady, devoid of the emotion that was swirling like a tempest inside him. "Clara," he said, holding up the receipt, letting the elegant script of Marcus Thorn catch her eye. "We need to talk. Not about this," he said, indicating the receipt, "but about this." And he placed a printout of the CRA Designs payment schedule on her vanity table. The color instantly drained from her face, leaving her a ghastly white. The makeup brush slipped from her fingers and clattered to the marble. The time for denial was over. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Clara stared at the printout, her jaw slack. The facade of the confident, sophisticated designer had evaporated, replaced by the terrified vulnerability of a caught child. She reached out a trembling hand toward the spreadsheet, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading fear that Daniel had never seen before. "Daniel, I can explain," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Can you?" Daniel's voice was low, controlled, every syllable carrying the weight of his 10 years of trust. "Can you explain why Marcus Thorn spent $18,500 on a bracelet you swore was a bargain bin find? Can you explain apartment 42A at the Pinnacle? Or, more importantly, can you explain the $500,000 in consulting fees paid to CRA Designs, your firm, from Thorn Development, payments that began 2 weeks before the gift of this bracelet?" He lightly tapped the diamond bangle on her wrist. "Don't insult me with more lies, Clara. The spreadsheets don't lie. The truth, the whole truth, starts now." Clara collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. The tears came silently at first, then racking sobs that shook her slender frame. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she managed, her voice muffled. "He pressured me. The Azure Tower project, there were corners cut. Daniel, a massive structural flaw they needed to cover up. Marcus needed a plausible reason to sign off on an emergency funding release, to correct it without notifying the investors. He offered me a percentage to sign off on a false change order, reclassifying the flaw as an unexpected design advisory change that required immediate procurement." She looked up, her eyes red and streaming. "I needed the money for the new firm launch. It was a stupid, terrible decision, the bracelet. That was his way of making it seem like a personal gift, a secret between us, so I couldn't expose the money." He controlled me with the threat of exposing the fraud in the affair. He said I'd lose everything. Daniel felt a profound weariness, the exhaustion of a battle he never asked to fight. The betrayal was deeper than he had imagined. It wasn't just an affair. It was an act of corporate espionage and financial fraud that could land her in prison and ruin his own spotless reputation by association. He controlled you because you chose to take the first payment, Clara, Daniel stated flatly. You bought into his lie, just like you tried to sell me yours. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't allow the financial fraud to stand, and he certainly couldn't allow Marcus Thorne to walk away unscathed. Daniel, the man of logic and ledgers, had to turn this betrayal into a tactical asset. We are going to dissolve the marriage immediately, he said, his voice decisive. But you are going to help me expose Marcus Thorne first. If you try to protect him, I will turn over everything, the receipt, the spreadsheet, the testimony to the SEC, and the district attorney's office. You will go down for fraud. Her eyes widened further. Expose him? But what about me? You cooperate. You provide me with every detail, every document, every email about the Azure Tower project and the payoff. I will use my connections to present the evidence in a way that implicates Thorne Development's CEO in massive financial fraud and bribery, and your involvement as a coerced witness with limited, although compromising, participation. We minimize your exposure. That is the only way you walk away with anything. It took 2 hours of intense, agonizing conversation, but Daniel's logic, cold and undeniable, won out. Clara was trapped, and Daniel was her only lifeline. She started downloading the encrypted files, the true documents of Thorne's deceit. The bracelet, the glittering lie, was the first thing she took off, placing it on the desk, a silent surrender. Daniel looked at the bracelet one last time, no longer seeing a symbol of love or betrayal, but a piece of evidence. He had lost his wife, but he had saved himself from financial ruin and restored his faith in the power of truth. The truth, in the end, was not just on a balance sheet. It was etched onto a discarded sales slip. I hope you enjoyed the story of the discounted bracelet, a tale that shows how even the smallest lie can unravel a decade of trust. If you want more gripping true crime stories and mysteries that expose the secrets lurking behind closed doors, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us bring more compelling cases to light.